For our Bible study for today and in the sermon, we're going to look at chapter 7 of Mark, verses 24 through chapter 8, verses 26. And for this part, this Bible study, we're only going to be looking at the end of chapter 7. And the bulk of the section is going to be in the sermon. And the reason for that is there was really no good way to divide up that section, and we get the meat of it, we get the heart of that story if we look at that whole section. So we're going to look at these earlier ones, the end of chapter 7 for this Bible study. And it'll be a little bit shorter Bible study unless I spend too much rambling time here in the beginning. But the fun thing about doing this section for the Bible study is that this section, the whole thing, feels like we've read a similar story recently or had the story in our lectionary recently. And while those are both true, a 10 to 15 minute sermon rarely gives us the time to dig into some of the finer details of the text. And with a 10-ish minute Bible study, we can only go so deep, but we can go deeper than usual. And there are some great details to explore. And these next two stories that we're going to do for this Bible study are interesting ones. Where in last week's passage, Jesus declares all food clean. Here, he seems to declare all people clean, as he works to help a Gentile woman in a pagan city and a man in the unclean area of the Decapolis. So let's take a look. Chapter 7, verses 24 through 30. From there he sent out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman, whose little daughter had an unclean spirit, immediately heard about him. And she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." Ouch. But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. This section hits a single point really, really hard. Verse 24, in Tyre, a Gentile area. In verse 26, a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin, that is, a Gentile. Who is Jesus helping out here? Not just the Jewish people anymore, but all people. And this is not your standard miracle story because there's no reaction to the miracle. We won't even see her react once she's gone home and found the demon gone. Now that's in part because there's a great distance, but the main part of this lack of reaction is that the miracle is not really the one about the daughter, although it is. The miracle is that Jesus has opened his mission so far to even this Gentile woman. And we hear the rough words of Jesus in this section. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But the important thing to hear is not that Jesus would use these words, but he is laying out the argument that his disciples will later face. The change of direction his disciples will later make. That is not a narrow call, but a much, much broader one. You can hear the words of the Pharisees in what Jesus initially says, but with the help of the Syrophoenician woman, Jesus overcomes them and allows the disciples and all of us to overcome them. Now on to that next very interconnected section, starting verse 31. Then Jesus returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon toward the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hands on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then, looking up to the heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephata, that is, be opened. And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one. But the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. Again, a Gentile. But this story is much bigger than that. We get a clue if we check out the early Greek translations of the entire Bible, where the Greek word for that man's infirmity, mogalalon, only appears twice. Here and in Isaiah 35:6. This 35:6 passage is about, as one commentary put it, the glorious fulfillment of God's saving purpose in the end time. And this, He has done everything well, is a lot more than saying, Jesus sure is a good guy. But it's connecting back to Isaiah 35:6, where God has proven trustworthy and fulfilled all of God's promises to everyone, including the Gentiles. Now, I had originally planned on doing more on chapter 8 here, but it became clear the more that I studied chapter 8, it'd be a travesty to break it up. This is another one of those moments where we see a verse we like. You know, we'll do Google searches for a verse that we like, and we'll pick it out, but we don't always do it justice when we just snatch a verse out of an entire section. So much of the Bible is about what's around it, how it's interconnected, what its context is. And I'll admit, there are parts of this chapter 8 section that I've always struggled with, but a lot of those struggles came because I read them out of context. I didn't take that whole huge section that we're going to get into today. So, the plan is now to get into that in the sermon, which has a bit more reading to it now, but it's one that's very much connected and should be read together. So, short and sweet Bible study today. Through these two stories, we see that Jesus comes for all of us, that Jesus' call, His mission is not limited, that it's so very broad, that Jesus will do everything in His power, go to unclean lands to make them clean, to remind them that they're not alone, to remind them that they can see, they can hear, that miracles are possible. That's our Bible study for today, although most of the Bible study is about to come. Thank you for joining us for today.